The first time my mother told me I didn't need to be there, she smiled while she said it. It was early November, a cold Sunday afternoon in Maplewood, Oregon. The kind where the sky stays the same dull gray all day, and the air smells like wet leaves. I was 31 years old, standing in my parents' living room, holding a mug of coffee I hadn't asked for, listening to my mother explain why I shouldn't attend my own sister's wedding planning meeting. "It's just logistics, Nora," she said, touching my arm lightly. "You don't need to sit through all that." My name is Nora Holloway. I'm 31. I work as a project analyst for a mid-sized real estate development firm in Portland. I pay my own bills. I own my car outright. I've lived on my own since I was 22. On paper, I'm independent. In my family, that independence has always been treated like a phase I never outgrew. Across the room, my father, Glenn Holloway, sat in his recliner, remote in hand, pretending to watch a football game. He didn't look at me once. My younger sister, Paige, was curled up on the couch, scrolling through wedding photos on her phone, her engagement ring catching the light every time she moved her hand. "We just don't want you feeling overwhelmed," Paige added without looking up. "There's a lot going on." Overwhelmed. That word had followed me my entire life. When I asked questions, when I pushed back, when I wanted clarity instead of vague reassurance. "I'm not overwhelmed," I said calmly. "I just don't understand why I'm being excluded." My mother's smile tightened. "You're not excluded. Then why does it feel like I am?" She glanced toward my father, then back at me. "This wedding is expensive. Your father and I are handling most of it. Paige doesn't need extra opinions." Extra opinions. As if my presence alone complicated things. I looked at Paige. "Do you want me there?" She hesitated for half a second too long. "It's fine either way." That was the answer. I nodded once. Okay. I left shortly after, making some excuse about work. No one tried to stop me. As I drove home, the familiar sensation settled in my chest. Not anger. Not sadness. Displacement. That night, I stared at the ceiling of my apartment and tried to pinpoint when things had shifted so subtly that I'd almost missed it. I'd always been the responsible one, the one who moved out early, the one who didn't ask for help, the one my parents described as low maintenance. Low maintenance is another way of saying you don't require much investment. Paige had always required investment. When she wanted to start a small event planning business at 24, my parents gave her a loan. When it failed, they called it experience. When she got engaged to Mark Bennett, a commercial contractor with a loud laugh and a firm handshake, my parents announced they'd be handling everything, including the house. That detail came out 2 weeks later. It was Thanksgiving dinner, held at my parents' place as always. The turkey was dry, the table too small, the conversation carefully managed. My father cleared his throat halfway through dessert. "We've decided to gift Paige and Mark the lake house." The lake house. It was a modest property, about an hour outside town. My grandmother's house. The one we spent summers in growing up. The one my grandmother, Ruth Holloway, had told me more than once would be divided evenly between her grandchildren someday. Paige gasped. Mark reached for her hand. My mother beamed. "That's wonderful," Paige said, eyes glossy. I sat very still. "You mean after the wedding?" I asked. "No," my father said. "We're transferring it now. Easier for taxes." I waited for the rest of the sentence. It didn't come. "I thought Grandma wanted it split," I said quietly. My father finally looked at me. His expression was flat. "Things change." My mother jumped in quickly. "You're doing well on your own, Nora. Paige is just starting out. It makes sense." There it was. The justification wrapped in praise. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I finished my coffee, excused myself, and went home. 2 days later, my mother called. "Your father wants to finalize the paperwork this weekend," she said. "You don't need to come." That was when it hit me. This wasn't about convenience, or stress, or weddings. This was about control. They weren't just giving Paige the house. They were rewriting the future. Quietly, assuming I wouldn't object, because I never had before. I didn't tell them I'd already contacted a lawyer. Her name was Marissa Cole, estate and property law, late 40s, sharp voice, minimal patience for vague family explanations. If your grandmother's will exists and specifies equal inheritance, they can't bypass you without your consent, she said. They didn't ask for it, I replied. Marissa paused. Then that's a problem. Thanksgiving passed in silence. Christmas was approaching. Paige sent me wedding inspiration links like nothing was wrong. Then, on December 3rd, I received an email from my father. Subject: signatures needed. Attached were documents I hadn't seen before. Transfer deeds, trust amendments. My name appeared once. As a witness, not an owner. I stared at the screen, heart steady, mind clear. This was the moment. Not the wedding, not the holiday, not the argument that never happened. This email was the line. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt ready. I didn't reply to my father's email. Not right away. I printed the documents instead and laid them out across my kitchen table, like a puzzle someone else had started without me. Deeds, trust language, legal phrasing designed to look routine if you didn't slow down long enough to actually read. That was always the trick in my family. Move fast. Call it practical. Shame anyone who hesitated. My name appeared exactly 3 times. Once as a witness, once in a clause releasing future claims, once in a sentence that effectively said, I agreed not to contest the transfer of the lake house or any associated assets. I hadn't agreed to anything. I called Marissa. She didn't interrupt as I read sections out loud. I could hear her typing on the other end. Nora, she said finally, this isn't just about the lake house. I figured. These documents restructure your parents' estate, she continued. They're setting precedent. If you sign, you're not just giving up this property. You're acknowledging a pattern of exclusion. Pattern. That word stayed with me. So what do? I asked. You do nothing, Marissa said. Not yet. You gather information. Information, it turned out, was something my family assumed I wouldn't seek. I started with my grandmother's will. Ruth Holloway had died 4 years earlier. At the time, my parents told me everything was handled and that the house would stay in the family until a later date. I hadn't pushed. I was grieving. I trusted them. That trust had been convenient. Marissa requested a copy of the will from probate court. It arrived 3 days later. The language was clear. Painfully clear. The lake house was to be held in trust until my grandmother's grandchildren reached the age of 30, at which point it would be sold, and the proceeds divided equally unless both parties agreed otherwise in writing. Both parties. Me and Paige. I was 31. Paige was 28, which meant the trust shouldn't have been dissolved yet. And even if it had been, I should have been involved. I sat on my couch, staring at the document, the quiet in my apartment suddenly feeling loud. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a difference of opinion. This was a deliberate decision to move around me. I didn't call my parents. I didn't confront Paige. I didn't ask questions they'd only half answer. Instead, I drove out to the lake house. It was early December. The road was slick with rain, the trees bare and dark against the sky. I hadn't been there in over a year. The place looked the same. White siding, green shutters. The porch swing my grandfather built, except for one thing. The lock had been changed. I stood there longer than I needed to, key useless in my hand, feeling something harden in my chest. Inside, lights were on. Paige opened the door, surprise flashing across her face before she recovered. Nora, what are you doing here? I came to see the house, I said. It's still Grandma's. She hesitated, then stepped aside. We're just fixing it up. Mark was in the kitchen, tools spread across the counter. He nodded at me like we were acquaintances. You should have told me, Paige said lightly. Dad said he emailed you. He did, I replied, with documents I haven't signed. She frowned. It's all taken care of. Not legally, I said. The room went quiet. Paige crossed her arms. Why are you making this difficult? That question was so familiar, it almost made me smile. I'm not, I said. I'm asking to be included. Mark cleared his throat. Look, Nora, your parents are helping us get started. You don't even want this place. You don't know what I want, I replied. Paige's voice sharpened. You always do this. You make everything complicated. I looked at her then. Really looked. Not as my sister, but as someone benefiting from a system she didn't question because it worked for her. This was never about complication, I said quietly. It's about consent. She rolled her eyes. You're overthinking. I left without arguing. That night, my mother called. "Why did you go to the house?" she asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "Because my key doesn't work anymore," I said. A pause. "We didn't think you'd need it," she said. That sentence told me everything. "I'm not signing anything," I said calmly. My mother sighed. "Your father is very upset." "I'm sure," I replied. "He feels like you're turning against the family." I let the silence stretch. "What family?" I asked finally. She didn't answer. 2 days later, my father showed up at my apartment. He stood in the doorway, coat still on, eyes scanning my space like he was assessing something for flaws. "You're being unreasonable," he said. I didn't invite him in. "No," I replied. "You're trying to give her something that doesn't belong solely to you." His jaw tightened. "We raised you better than this." That was the moment I understood. To him, obedience was morality. Agreement was love. "I'm talking to a lawyer," I said. Fear. "You don't need to do that," he said quickly. "This can stay in the family." "It already should have," I replied. He left without another word. That night, Marissa filed a notice with the court to freeze the trust assets pending review. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But the renovations at the lake house halted. The transfer paperwork stalled. The wedding plans shifted. Paige stopped texting me, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like leverage. The freeze changed the tone of everything. Not immediately. At first, my parents pretended nothing had happened. My mother sent a group text about Christmas dinner like she always did, complete with assigned arrival times and a reminder not to discuss stressful topics. Paige shared a photo of wedding invitations she was considering, tagging me like muscle memory had taken over. But underneath the surface, something had cracked. I knew because my father stopped calling. That might not sound significant, but in my family, silence was never neutral. It was tactical. It meant someone was regrouping. Marissa warned me this would happen. When people lose control quietly, she said, they look for another way to reassert it. She wasn't wrong. 3 days after the trust freeze, I received a letter from my parents' attorney. Not an email, a physical letter, heavy paper, formal language. It accused me of interfering with family affairs, of acting in bad faith, of misunderstanding my grandmother's intentions. It suggested, delicately, that my emotional distance from the family had influenced my judgment. They weren't challenging the facts. They were challenging my character. I didn't respond. Marissa did. She replied with a request for full disclosure of all trust-related communications over the past 5 years, including emails, notes, and third-party correspondence. That was when my mother finally broke. She showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Tuesday evening, her face pale, her coat still buttoned. "You've gone too far," she said the moment I opened the door. I stepped aside and let her in. Not because I owed her access, but because I wanted to see what she would say when she couldn't perform for anyone else. She stood in my living room, looking uncomfortable. "Your father is under a lot of stress." "I imagine he is," I said. "He's always handled these things," she continued. "He knows what's best." "For who?" I asked. She shook her head. "This isn't how families solve problems." I sat down. "This is how legal issues are handled when families stop being fair." Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed firm. "You're hurting your sister." That sentence landed exactly where it was meant to. "Paige is getting married," she went on. "This should be a happy time." "And it still can be," I replied. "Nothing I've done prevents that." "You're threatening her future," my mother said. I looked at her. "No, I'm refusing to give up mine." She stared at me like I'd spoken a language she didn't understand. "You've always been so independent," she said softly. "We didn't think you'd mind." There it was, the quiet confession. "You didn't think I'd notice," I said. She didn't deny it. When she left, she hugged me the way she used to when I was a teenager. Brief, careful, like I might pull away. I didn't. Not because I was still seeking comfort, but because I was finally seeing her clearly. The next escalation came from Paige. She called me late that night. Her voice was sharp, brittle. "What do you want?" she demanded. "I want the trust handled according to Grandma's will," I said. "You know that house is my future," she snapped. "It was Grandma's," I replied. "Then it was both of ours." "You don't even like that place," she said. "You barely visit." "That doesn't mean I gave it up." She exhaled loudly. Mom says you're doing this because you're jealous. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I'm doing this because no one asked me, I said. Paige laughed bitterly. You always make everything about principles. No, I replied. I make it about boundaries. She hung up on me. The following week, Mark reached out, not to apologize, to negotiate. He suggested a compromise. Paige keeps the house. I get a payout later. No lawyers, no court, no drama. I forwarded the message to Marissa without responding. Her reply was immediate. Do not engage. This is an attempt to bypass the freeze. By mid-December, the situation had rippled outward. Extended family started calling. An aunt asked why I was attacking my parents. A cousin warned me I was going to regret this. Someone mentioned my grandmother would be ashamed. No one asked me what I wanted. At work, I noticed myself checking my phone more often. Waiting. Bracing. I'd thought I was immune to the emotional pull. But conditioning runs deep. Then something unexpected happened. Marissa called me with an update. We received the disclosure. And? I asked. There are inconsistencies, she said. Emails missing. Dates that don't line up. And one thing in particular. I held my breath. There's a handwritten note your father submitted as evidence of your grandmother's intent, she continued. It references a conversation she supposedly had with him about giving the lake house solely to Paige. My stomach dropped. I've never seen it. Neither has the court, Marissa said, because it isn't attached. So it's just his word, I said. Yes, she replied. And that's a problem. That night, I took out the box of things I'd kept from my grandmother. Cards, photos, old letters she used to send me when I moved out. At the bottom was a folded piece of paper I'd forgotten about, her handwriting. Not a will, not a legal document, just a note. Nora, you see things clearly. Don't let anyone rush you into agreeing to something that doesn't feel right. I sat on the floor and read it twice. The timing wasn't dramatic. There was no lightning strike, no rush of vindication, just clarity. My grandmother had known, and now? So did I. Marissa filed a motion the next morning to compel full testimony regarding the note's origin and to question the validity of any undocumented intent claims. The court date was set for January. Christmas was 2 weeks away, and for the first time, I knew exactly what I would not be doing. I would not be backing down. I didn't go to Christmas dinner. I sent a text the morning of December 24th. Short, polite, final. I won't be attending this year. I need space while this is unresolved. My mother replied with a sad face emoji. My father didn't respond. Paige left me on red. For most of my life, skipping a family holiday would have filled me with guilt. I would have replayed every conversation, imagined their disappointment, convinced myself I was selfish. That year, the guilt never came. What came instead was a quiet sense of alignment. For the first time, my actions matched what I felt inside. I spent Christmas Eve alone in my apartment, cooking a small meal I actually wanted to eat. No performance, no tension, no waiting for the moment someone would say something passive-aggressive and expect me to absorb it. On Christmas morning, I took a long walk through my neighborhood while the city was still quiet. Houses glowed softly through their windows. Somewhere, families were opening gifts, smiling for photos that would later be used as proof everything was fine. I didn't envy them. 2 days later, Marissa called. The court has scheduled the preliminary hearing for January 9th, she said. Your father will need to explain the handwritten note under oath. I exhaled slowly. What are our chances? She paused. If the note exists only as a claim and not as a document, it weakens his position significantly. And Paige? She's not a party to the trust, Marissa replied. She benefits from the outcome, but legally, this is between you, your parents, and the estate. That distinction mattered. Paige had always been the visible beneficiary, the one everyone protected. But the decisions weren't hers. They never had been. The days leading up to the hearing were tense in a muted way. No more angry messages. No more negotiation attempts. Just a heavy silence that felt like everyone was holding their breath. On January 5th, my father finally called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Nora, he said, his voice measured. We need to talk. We're talking through lawyers, I replied. This doesn't have to be adversarial, he said. Families don't air their disagreements in court. I leaned against my kitchen counter, steady. Families also don't rewrite wills in secret. He inhaled sharply. You don't understand the pressure we were under. Pressure doesn't erase consent, I said. He lowered his voice. Your grandmother was confused near the end. I closed my eyes. If that's true, then this shouldn't be happening at all. Silence. You're risking everything, he said. No, I replied. You already did. He hung up. The hearing itself was brief, but it changed the atmosphere completely. The courtroom wasn't large. Neutral colors, no audience, just the judge, the attorneys, and the facts laid out without emotion. My father testified first. He spoke confidently at the beginning, describing his role as caretaker, executor, protector of family stability. He referenced conversations with my grandmother, her concern for Paige's future, her desire to see the house used rather than sold. Then the judge asked the question that mattered. Do you have documentation of this intent? My father hesitated. No, Your Honor, he said. It was verbal. And the handwritten note you referenced? The judge pressed. I no longer have it, my father replied. When did you last see it? Another pause. I don't recall. The judge nodded once and turned to Marissa. Marissa didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply presented the will, the trust language, the age requirement, and the fact that I had never been consulted. Then she introduced my grandmother's note, not as a legal document, as context. The judge read it silently. When she looked up, her expression had changed. The trust freeze remains in place, she said. Further review is required. Just like that. Outside the courtroom, my father wouldn't look at me. Paige wasn't there. That absence spoke louder than anything she could have said. That evening, my mother called again. Her voice was quieter than usual. I didn't know, she said. I waited. I didn't know the trust said that, she continued. Your father handled everything. I believe you, I said. She sounded relieved. Then why won't you just let this go? Because letting it go means letting it happen again. I can't, I replied. She cried softly, not dramatically, just tired. I don't recognize our family anymore, she said. I do, I replied. I just see it clearly now. After the hearing, the court ordered a full review of the estate handling. Timelines, communications, actions taken after my grandmother's death. This was no longer about the lake house. It was about whether my parents had acted within their authority at all. Marissa was honest with me. This is where things escalate. I nodded. I'm ready. That night, Paige finally texted me. You didn't have to do this. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Neither did you. She didn't reply. And for the first time, I understood something that hurt more than betrayal. She had chosen comfort over fairness. And I was done paying the price for that choice. The review didn't announce itself with drama. There were no sirens, no public statements, no confrontations at the dinner table. It arrived as a letter, certified, plain envelope, county seal in the corner. I opened it standing at my kitchen counter, the same place where I'd first read the transfer documents weeks earlier. The language was formal, precise, and completely uninterested in anyone's feelings. The court was requesting additional records related to the administration of Ruth Holloway's estate, financial statements, communication logs, documentation of trustee decisions made after her death. They wanted everything. When I called Marissa, she didn't sound surprised. This is the point where people usually panic, she said. Because now it's not about intentions. It's about actions. My parents responded the way they always had when pressure mounted. They closed ranks. My mother stopped calling entirely. My father sent one short email through his attorney, stating they would cooperate fully and expected the same courtesy. Paige posted wedding updates on social media like nothing was happening, smiling in dress fittings, posing with Mark in front of the lake house, carefully cropping out the renovations that had now stopped mid-project. The house sat frozen in time, half-painted, tools stacked in the corner, a place caught between ownership and truth. I didn't drive out there again. I didn't need to. The next escalation came from a place I hadn't expected. Work. My manager called me into her office one afternoon in mid-January, closing the door behind me with a seriousness that made my stomach tighten. This isn't a performance issue, she said quickly, reading my expression. I just wanted to check in. I waited. I've noticed you've been distracted, she continued. Still delivering, but carrying a lot. I considered lying. It would have been easy, professional, clean. Instead, I said, I'm involved in a legal matter with my family. She nodded slowly. That tends to leak into everything. Yes, I said. She leaned back. If you need flexibility, take it. And if anything comes up that could affect the company, tell me early. That was it. No judgment, no pressure. I walked out of her office with an unexpected sense of relief. This was what support looked like. Not control, not assumptions, just space. 2 days later, Marissa called, with her voice lowered, focused. We've identified a discrepancy, she said. Your parents transferred maintenance funds from the trust to cover wedding-related expenses. I stopped pacing. That's not allowed. No, she said. It's not. The trust funds were to be used exclusively for upkeep of the lake house until dissolution. Not for catering deposits, not for venue holds, not for floral arrangements. They treated the trust like an extension of their checking account, Marissa continued. That's a breach of fiduciary duty. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, but this time it wasn't panic, it was resolve. What happens now? I asked. Now, she said, they have to explain themselves. The next hearing was set for early February. Paige still hadn't spoken to me. Mark sent one more message, suggesting we stop this before it gets ugly. I didn't respond. The ugliness had already happened. It just hadn't been acknowledged yet. The February hearing felt different from the last one. Less tentative, more deliberate. The judge listened as Marissa laid out the misuse of funds, the altered timelines, the undocumented decisions. My father's attorney objected where he could, but the objections felt thin, procedural, defensive. When my father took the stand again, his confidence was gone. He spoke more carefully this time, slower, like every word might be used against him, because it could. The judge asked him directly whether he believed he had the authority to repurpose trust funds without written consent from all beneficiaries. He said yes. The judge asked why. He said because it was for the good of the family. The judge paused, looked down at her notes, then back up. That's not a legal standard, she said. The room went very quiet. After the hearing, the court ordered an independent trustee to be appointed temporarily, effective immediately. My father was removed from control of the trust. That was the moment the balance shifted. Not loudly, not emotionally, legally. Outside the courtroom, my mother finally approached me. Her face looked older than it had a month ago. Drawn, tired. I never wanted this, she said. I know, I replied. She frowned. Then why does it feel like you're punishing us? I met her eyes. Because you're experiencing consequences for the first time. She flinched. Paige didn't come to the hearing. Later, I heard she'd stayed home, claiming stress. The wedding was 6 weeks away. Invitations already sent, deposits paid, with money that now had to be accounted for. That evening, Marissa and I reviewed options. Once the trustee completes their assessment, she said, there are 2 likely outcomes. Either the trust proceeds according to your grandmother's will, or your parents face additional penalties. And Paige? I asked. Marissa chose her words carefully. She may have to adjust her expectations. I went home that night and sat on my couch in the dark, listening to the city hum outside my window. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. For the first time, the decisions weren't being made around me. They were being made in front of me, in daylight, where everyone could see. That was the real shift. 2 days later, I received a message from Paige. Can we talk? I stared at it longer than I expected. Then I replied, not yet. The trust review would take weeks. The wedding clock was ticking. The house sat unfinished. Everything was suspended. And for once, that suspension wasn't hurting me. It was protecting me. The independent trustee's name was Leonard Fisk, late 50s, former probate judge turned private fiduciary. Gray hair, precise diction, and a reputation for being unimpressed by family narratives. Marissa described him as professionally allergic to excuses. I liked him immediately. His first action was simple. He froze all non-essential spending tied to the trust and requested in-person interviews with everyone involved. Individually. No joint meetings. No shared stories. The letters went out on a Monday. By Tuesday night, my phone rang. It was Paige. This time, her voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't defensive. It was scared. "They're asking questions," she said, "about money, about when things happened." "Yes," I replied. "I didn't know where the money came from," she insisted quickly. "I swear, Mom and Dad just said it was handled." "I believe you didn't ask," I said. "That's not the same thing." She went quiet. "Can you help me?" she asked. That question hit harder than any accusation. Help her how? Lie? Intervene? Fix something she benefited from but didn't want to examine? "I'm not stepping in," I said calmly. "Not against the process." "So you're just going to let this ruin my wedding?" she snapped. I closed my eyes. "No, Paige. I'm letting the truth exist." She hung up. Leonard interviewed me 2 days later. His office was spare. No family photos, no warmth, just competence. He asked factual questions, dates, conversations, what I knew and when I knew it. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react. At the end, he folded his hands and said, "You didn't initiate this lightly." "No," I said. "I tried not to initiate it at all." He nodded. "That's consistent with the record." When my parents were interviewed, the tone shifted again. I didn't hear details directly, but Marissa filled me in afterward. "They're contradicting each other," she said, "on timing, on intent, on who knew what." "And Paige?" I asked. "She's emotional," Marissa replied, "but cooperative." The word cooperative mattered. By early March, the wedding was 3 weeks away. Paige sent out a message to the family, saying the ceremony would be smaller than planned, for personal reasons. Mark's parents reportedly weren't pleased. Deposits were renegotiated. Some vendors walked. The lake house was officially deemed part of the trust and off-limits until resolution. That was when my father finally broke silence. He sent me a message, not through a lawyer, direct. "You've made your point. This has gone far enough." I read it twice before replying. This isn't about a point. It's about correcting something that was wrong. His response came immediately. "You always needed to be right." I typed back slowly. Number 1. I needed to stop being erased. He didn't reply again. The trustees' preliminary findings arrived the following week. Marissa called me into her office to review them together. Leonard's language was careful, but the conclusions were clear. The trust had been mishandled. Funds had been used improperly. Decisions had been made without required consent. Intent had been assumed, not documented. He recommended full restoration of the trust, according to my grandmother's will, reimbursement of misused funds, and a formal review of my parents' actions as trustees. In other words, accountability. "This is strong," Marissa said. "Very strong." "And next steps?" I asked. "Your parents can contest," she replied, "or they can settle." The settlement offer came 2 days later. It was framed as generosity. Paige keeps the house. I receive a payout smaller than my share would have been. No admission of wrongdoing. Everything stays private. The condition was clear. My silence. Marissa didn't sugarcoat it. This is their attempt to contain damage. I thought about the past year. The emails, the meetings, the careful way decisions had been made around me, not with me. "No," I said. "I want the will enforced as written." Marissa nodded. "Then we proceed." The wedding happened anyway. Smaller, quieter, held at a rented venue instead of the lake house. I wasn't invited. I didn't mind. On the day of the ceremony, I went to work, finished a long project review, then met a friend for dinner. Life went on. That night, my mother called for the first time in weeks. "She got married today," she said softly. "I know," I replied. There was a pause. "I wish things were different." "So do I," I said. But wishing didn't protect me. She didn't argue. In April, Leonard submitted his final report to the court. The recommendation stood. Trust restored. Assets reevaluated. House to be sold when both beneficiaries agreed, or at a court-determined date. Proceeds split evenly. My parents were formally removed as trustees. The court adopted the recommendation in full. When Marissa told me, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not relief. Finality. Paige sent me one last message that evening. "I hope you're happy." I stared at the screen. Then I typed back, "I hope you're honest with yourself." That was the last time we spoke. The house went on the market in May. It sold quickly. And for the first time, something that had once been used to divide us became exactly what my grandmother intended. Equal. The check arrived on a Thursday. Plain envelope. no note, no explanation, just a bank-issued cashier's check representing my half of the lake house sale, deposited through the trust as ordered by the court. I stared at it longer than I expected to, not because of the amount, but because of what it represented. Proof that the system worked when you forced it to. Proof that silence had never been my only option, even when it felt like it. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone. I endorsed the check, scanned it, and deposited it the same way I handled everything else in my life. Quietly, deliberately. That afternoon, I emailed Marissa. Funds received. Thank you. Her reply came back almost immediately. You did the hard part. Don't minimize that. I closed my laptop and sat back in my chair, feeling a strange emptiness where adrenaline had lived for months. When you spend that long braced for impact, the absence of conflict feels unfamiliar, almost unsettling. The wedding photos appeared online 2 days later, page in white, Mark smiling stiffly, my parents seated in the front row, expressions carefully composed. Comments filled with congratulations, heart emojis, declarations of love and unity. I didn't scroll far. I didn't need to. A week later, my mother asked if we could talk. Not meet. Just talk. I agreed, with conditions. Phone call only. Short. No rehashing. She called on Sunday evening. I don't understand how we got here, she said after a few moments of small talk. I do, I replied. She sighed. You always see things so clearly. There it was again. The compliment that excused everything. This wasn't clarity, I said. It was accumulation. What do you mean? Years of being talked over, decided for, assumed about, I said. This wasn't one moment. It was the moment I stopped absorbing. She was quiet. I thought letting your father handle things kept us safe, she said finally. It kept things simple, I replied. Not safe. She didn't argue. Do you hate us? She asked. I considered the question carefully. No, I said. But I don't trust you the way I used to. That hurt her more than anger ever could have. I don't know how to rebuild that, she whispered. That's not my job, I replied gently. It never was. We ended the call soon after. At work, something shifted. My manager asked me to lead a new project. Higher visibility, more responsibility. The kind of role I would have hesitated to accept a year earlier. This time, I said yes, without overthinking. I noticed other changes too, subtle ones. I spoke up sooner in meetings. I stopped explaining myself when I declined things. I trusted my instincts instead of checking them against imagined disapproval. Strength, I realized, wasn't about endurance. It was about permission. In June, I ran into Mark at a grocery store. He looked surprised to see me. Awkward, like someone who hadn't rehearsed this encounter. Hey, he said. I didn't expect to run into you. Life's like that, I replied. He hesitated. Paige has been having a hard time. I didn't ask how. She feels like she lost something, he continued. She did, I said. So did I. He nodded slowly. I didn't see it before. That doesn't change what happened, I replied. No, he admitted. It doesn't. We parted without hostility, without resolution, and that was fine. In July, I used part of the money to do something no one in my family would have approved of. I took a month-long leave from work and traveled alone. Nothing dramatic, no luxury resorts. Just a series of small towns, bookstores, quiet cafes. Places where no one knew my last name or my family history. In one town, I spent an afternoon sitting by a river, watching the water move steadily past rocks it didn't bother to argue with. That image stayed with me. When I returned home, my parents' house felt like a place I'd once visited, not somewhere I belonged. I drove past it once without stopping. I didn't feel sad. I felt complete. In August, Leonard Fisk closed the trust officially. Final documents filed, accounts settled, no loose ends. Marissa sent me a final invoice and a short note. You held your ground. Most people don't. I paid the invoice without resentment. That was another quiet victory. Paige never reached out again. Neither did my father. My mother sent a card on my birthday. No apology, no pressure, just a simple message, thinking of you. I placed it in a drawer and went about my day. What surprised me most was not the distance, but how natural it began to feel. I hadn't lost my family all at once. I'd simply stopped chasing their approval, and in doing so, I gained something I hadn't realized I'd been missing: authority over my own life. That wasn't revenge. That was reclamation. The quiet that followed felt earned. Not peaceful in a sentimental way. Practical. Like a room after furniture has been removed, and you finally see how much space there is to breathe. I didn't announce my distance from my family. I didn't explain it to anyone who didn't ask. I simply stopped rearranging my life around people who had already decided where I belonged. In September, my father attempted one last maneuver. It came in the form of an email forwarded by my mother. "Your father thinks it might be time to talk. He says we should put this behind us as a family." No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a desire for closure, on his terms. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, because I recognized the pattern. For years, moving on had meant me swallowing what hurt so everyone else could stay comfortable. It meant pretending something hadn't happened so the image of unity stayed intact. This time, I chose accuracy over harmony. At work, the new project consumed most of my attention. It involved reviewing land acquisitions and risk assessments for a multi-phase development outside the city. The stakes were high, the timelines unforgiving. The role required precision and a willingness to say no when something didn't add up. I was good at it. One afternoon, a senior partner pulled me aside after a meeting. "You don't rush decisions," he said. "You don't get pressured." "That's rare." I smiled politely. He had no idea how hard-won that skill was. In October, something unexpected happened. I received a call from my grandmother's old attorney, the one who drafted her original will. His name was Harold Kim. He sounded surprised when I answered. "I wasn't sure you'd want to hear from me," he said. "I do," I replied. "I've been following the case," he continued. Quietly. I wanted to say, "You did right by her." I swallowed. "Thank you." "There was something else," he added. "Your grandmother left a letter with me. Not legally binding, more personal. She asked me to give it to you if things ever became complicated." My heart skipped. We met the next day. The letter was short, written in her careful script. "Nora, if you're reading this, it means someone tried to decide your future without asking you. I worried about that. You've always been the one who sees the edges of things. Don't let anyone use your silence as permission. You deserve fairness, not favors. Love, Grandma." I didn't cry. I felt seen. That letter didn't change anything legally. It didn't need to. It closed a loop inside me I hadn't known was still open. That night, I drafted an email I'd been avoiding. To my parents. I kept it brief. "I'm not interested in rebuilding a relationship without accountability. Please respect my decision to keep distance. If that changes, I'll reach out." I sent it and felt no urge to check for a reply. There wasn't one. November arrived, bringing with it the season that used to tighten my chest. Thanksgiving. That year, I spent it with friends. No assigned seats, no speeches, no undercurrents. Just food, laughter, and conversations that didn't require translation. At one point, someone asked about my family. I said, "We're not close right now," and that was enough. In December, Paige's name surfaced one last time. A mutual acquaintance mentioned she and Mark were struggling financially. The wedding had been expensive. Expectations hadn't adjusted quickly enough. I felt no satisfaction hearing that, just distance. Karma, I was learning, wasn't about punishment. It was about reality asserting itself when denial could no longer hold. The year ended quietly. No dramatic confrontation, no last-minute reconciliation, just a slow, steady separation that felt intentional instead of imposed. On New Year's Eve, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city lights flicker on as the sky darkened. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who stayed agreeable, the one who thought love meant compliance. I wished her well, because she got me here, and here felt solid. January returned the way it always does. Quiet, cold, uninterested in your past. I liked that about it. The holidays were over, the noise gone, and for the first time in my adult life, the beginning of the year didn't feel like something I had to brace for. There were no expectations to manage, no apologies to draft in my head, no unspoken negotiations waiting at the edge of every conversation, just time. Then, on a Tuesday morning, I received a voicemail from an unfamiliar number. "Nora, this is Daniel Foster. I'm calling regarding your father, Glenn Halloway. I represent him in a personal matter. Please return my call. I didn't call back immediately. I sat at my desk, phone face down, and let the name settle. Personal matter. Not family, not reconciliation, not even legal regarding the trust. Something else. When I did call him back later that afternoon, Daniel's tone was professional, but cautious. Your father has been experiencing some difficulties, he said. Health-related and financial. I waited. He's asked me to reach out because he believes you should be informed. Informed of what? I asked. Daniel cleared his throat. He's considering selling the family home. The words landed strangely. That house had been the center of everything. The place where decisions were made without me, where silence was enforced like a rule. And? I asked. He'd like your input. There it was. Not an apology. Not accountability. Input. I'm not involved in his financial decisions, I said evenly. I understand, Daniel replied. But legally, there are considerations. Your name appears in previous estate documents, and he wants to avoid future complications. I almost laughed. After everything, he was still thinking in terms of prevention. Of control. You can tell him, I said, that I don't object to whatever he chooses to do. Daniel hesitated. He was hoping you might be willing to talk. I'm not, I replied. We ended the call politely. That night, my mother texted me for the first time in weeks. Your father isn't well. I think this has all taken a toll. I stared at the message longer than I should have. I typed, deleted, retyped. I'm sorry to hear that. I hope he's taking care of himself. I didn't add anything else. Her reply came quickly. He feels like he's lost everything. I set the phone down. Loss had a way of being recognized only when it was personal. At work, I found myself thinking less about my family and more about what I wanted next. The project I'd been leading was nearing completion, and there was talk of expanding the role into something permanent, bigger scope, more authority. I surprised myself by wanting it, not because it would prove anything to anyone else, but because I trusted myself to handle it. In February, I ran into an old neighbor from my parents' street while grocery shopping. She recognized me immediately. I heard about your father, she said in a hushed voice. Such a shame. Yes, I replied. He was always so strong, she continued. A real provider. I nodded politely. Strength, I'd learned, was often just dominance, wearing a respectable suit. Later that week, my mother called. She didn't ease into it. He's asking about you every day, she said. He keeps saying he doesn't understand why you've shut him out. I leaned against the counter, listening. He says you've always been the reasonable one, she continued, that you'll come around. There it was again. Reasonable. The word that had excused so much. Mom, I said quietly. Did he ever ask why I felt pushed out in the first place? Silence. That's what I thought, I said. She didn't argue. In March, the house went on the market. The listing appeared online with bright photos and careful descriptions. Charming, well-maintained, full of potential. I scrolled through them once, then closed the page. A week later, Daniel Foster called again. The house sold quickly, he said. Above asking. That's good, I replied. There will be proceeds remaining after debts, he continued. Your father is revising his will. I stopped pacing. I'm not part of that, I said. Of course he did. In the end, fairness had become his last bargaining chip. You can tell him, I said slowly, that I don't want to be written back into something that was used to erase me. Daniel was quiet. That's unusual. No, I replied. It's consistent. After the call, I felt a wave of something I hadn't expected. Grief, not for what was happening now, but for what could have happened differently years ago, if honesty hadn't been treated like a threat. I took a day off work and drove out of the city. No destination in mind, just movement. The road felt grounding. I thought about my father, sitting in an empty house, wondering where control had gone. About my mother, still trying to smooth edges that no longer existed. About Paige, building a life that now looked smaller than the one she'd been promised. And about myself, standing in my own life without needing to justify it. When I returned home that evening, there was a handwritten note slipped under my door from my mother. I don't know how to fix this, but I want you to know I'm trying to understand. I held the paper for a long time. Trying mattered. Understanding mattered more. I didn't respond right away. Some conversations can't be rushed without losing their meaning. As spring approached, I felt something settle into place. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, acceptance of who they were and who I no longer needed to be for them. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, unevenly, the way clarity usually does. Some mornings I woke up feeling light, almost optimistic. Other days, a familiar heaviness returned without warning. Not grief exactly, more like the afterimage of something that used to dominate my field of vision. The family home sold in early April. My mother told me over the phone, her voice careful, like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing and setting me back. He moved into a smaller place, she said. An apartment near the river. That sounds practical, I replied. He keeps the blinds closed most of the time, she added, then stopped herself. Sorry, that wasn't necessary. No, I said gently. It's okay. But we both knew what she was really saying. The man who once needed to see everything now preferred not to look out at all. A week later, Daniel Foster emailed again. This time, there was an attachment, a draft of my father's revised will. I didn't open it. Instead, I forwarded it to Marissa with a single line. Please confirm I'm not required to respond. Her reply came quickly. You are not obligated in any way. Ignoring it is a valid choice. So I ignored it. That act, small as it was, felt more decisive than anything I'd done in court. At work, my promotion became official. New title, expanded authority. A modest raise. Nothing flashy, but enough to signal trust. During the announcement meeting, I noticed something I hadn't before. No one questioned whether I deserved it. No one framed it as generosity. It was presented as a logical outcome of consistent performance. That was new. One afternoon, a junior analyst stopped by my desk. I hope you don't mind me asking, she said, hesitating. But how do you stay so calm when people push back? I thought about my answer longer than I expected, because I stopped confusing calm with compliance, I said. She nodded like that was something she needed to hear. In May, my mother asked if I would meet her for coffee. I agreed, choosing a neutral cafe halfway between our homes. Public, bright, no history in the walls. She arrived early, hands wrapped tightly around her cup. I've started therapy, she said before I could speak. That's good, I replied. She smiled faintly. Your father refused. I'm not. She looked at me carefully. I'm trying to understand my part in all of this. That's not easy work, I said. No, she agreed, especially when it means admitting I stayed quiet to keep the peace. I watched her closely. There was no performance in her voice this time, no appeal. I nodded. Avoidance has consequences. She swallowed. I don't expect forgiveness. That's good, I replied. Because this isn't about forgiveness. She looked. Then what is it about? She asked. Boundaries, I said. And time. She accepted that. We talked for an hour. About small things. About neutral things. When we parted, she hugged me. And this time it felt different. Not possessive, not apologetic. Just present. In June, Paige reached out. Not directly. Through my mother. She's thinking about starting a family, my mother said during one of our calls. She's scared. I didn't ask of what. She wonders if she did the right thing, my mother added. I closed my eyes. That's her question to answer. My mother sighed. She keeps asking why you won't talk to her. Because she's never acknowledged what happened, I said. And I'm not going to pretend it didn't matter. Silence stretched between us. I understand, my mother said finally. That was new. That summer, I did something I'd never done before. I made a long-term plan without factoring my family into it at all. I started looking at houses. Not to buy immediately, but to understand what I wanted. What felt like mine. One afternoon, standing in the empty living room of a small place with too much light and imperfect floors, I felt a sense of rightness that had nothing to do with money or status. This is what agency feels like, I thought. In July, my father was hospitalized briefly. Nothing dramatic. Complications, age, stress. My mother called to tell me. I just thought you should know, she said. Thank you, I replied. Would you like to visit? She asked, tentative. I pictured the room, the machines, the version of him that might try to reclaim authority through vulnerability. No, I said. Not right now. She didn't push. 2 days later, Daniel Foster sent one final message. Your father has finalized his estate documents. Your name remains included. No action is required from you. I deleted the email, not out of spite, out of clarity. I didn't need to be included to be validated. I didn't need future assets to justify past harm. What I needed, I already had. Space, voice, choice. By August, the story no longer felt like something I was inside of. It felt like something I'd walked out of. I still thought about my family sometimes. Mostly in the way you think about weather patterns that once shaped your days, but no longer dictate your schedule. They existed. They just didn't control the climate of my life anymore. And that realization didn't come with fireworks or triumph. It came with a quiet certainty. I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I had already chosen myself. By the time fall returned, the sharp edges of the story had worn smooth. Not because anything had been fixed, but because I had stopped touching the places that still hurt. In September, my mother and I settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar but workable. Short calls, occasional coffee. No pressure to perform closeness. No insistence that time alone would solve everything. We spoke like two adults learning each other again, without the roles we'd relied on for decades. She didn't mention my father unless I did. I noticed the effort. That mattered. He's quieter now, she said once, carefully. He reads a lot. Walks by the river. I nodded. I didn't ask follow-up questions. Some lives narrow as they age, not because they have to, but because there's nothing left to defend. At work, my responsibilities expanded again. I was asked to mentor 2 junior analysts. One of them reminded me of myself 10 years earlier. Capable, cautious, always checking the room before speaking. During one meeting, she hesitated before disagreeing with the senior manager. Her eyes flicked toward me, seeking permission she didn't need. Say it, I told her quietly. She did, and she was right. Afterward, she thanked me like I'd given her something extraordinary. I hadn't. I just refused to make silence look virtuous. In October, my grandmother's birthday passed. She would have been 89. I lit a candle that evening and sat with it until it burned low. No ritual, no prayer, just acknowledgement. I thought about the house, the trust, the letter she'd left with her attorney, the way she'd seen the fault lines long before I did. Some people protect you loudly, others do it by leaving you tools. That was her gift. Later that month, Paige sent me an email. Not long. Not defensive. I don't know how to say this without sounding like I'm asking for something, so I won't. I just want you to know I think about you more than you probably believe. I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop. I didn't respond. Not because I was punishing her, because her message was still centered on her discomfort, her uncertainty, her need to be seen, without acknowledging what she'd participated in. Growth doesn't begin with reflection. It begins with accountability, and she wasn't there yet. In November, the company hosted a small leadership retreat. No speeches, just workshops and long conversations. One afternoon, we were asked to share a moment that changed how we made decisions. I didn't plan to speak, but when it was my turn, the words came easily. I learned that being agreeable can be a liability, I said, especially when people mistake it for consent. No one interrupted. No one minimized it. That was the difference. On Thanksgiving, I stayed home, not because I was alone, because I was content. I cooked a simple meal, called a friend, took a walk. The day passed without the emotional tax it used to demand. In December, my father sent a card. No return address, no signature beyond his name. I hope you're well. That was it. I held it for a moment, then placed it in a drawer with other artifacts from a life I no longer inhabited. I didn't feel angry. I felt finished. The year closed without ceremony. No dramatic reconciliation, no final argument, no tidy ending. Just a series of quiet choices that added up to something solid. I'd stopped explaining myself, stopped waiting, stopped hoping people would change before I allowed myself peace. What surprised me most was how ordinary life became once I did that. Not empty, ordinary. And ordinary, I learned, can be extraordinary when it's yours. I wasn't the difficult daughter. I wasn't the expendable sister. I was the one who stepped out of a pattern and didn't look back. That wasn't revenge. That was freedom. The last decision I made in this story didn't involve a courtroom, a lawyer, or a document. It involved a phone call, I chose not to answer. It came on a quiet Monday morning in early January, almost exactly a year after the trust freeze. I was standing in my kitchen, coffee brewing, the city just waking up outside my window. My phone lit up on the counter, my father's name. I stared at it without moving. A year earlier, that sight would have sent a jolt through my body. My mind would have started racing, preparing arguments, rehearsing calm responses, bracing for disappointment. I would have answered out of habit, out of obligation, out of the belief that being available was the same as being loving. This time, I felt nothing sharp, just clarity. I let it ring. The voicemail came a minute later. His voice sounded older than I remembered. Not weak exactly, just stripped of authority. Nora, it's me. I don't know how much time I have left to make things right. I'd like to talk. No lawyers, no arguments, just us. I listened once, then I deleted it. Not because he didn't mean it. I believe, in his own way, he did. But meaning something is not the same as being ready to do it differently. And I had finally learned the difference. That afternoon, I signed papers for a small house on the east side of the city. Nothing extravagant. A place with creaky floors, too much light in the living room, and a backyard barely big enough for a chair, and a plant I would probably forget to water. When the real estate agent handed me the keys, she smiled and said, "First place on your own?" I smiled back. First place that's entirely mine. That night, I sat on the floor of the empty living room with a takeout container and a glass of wine, the keys resting in my palm. The silence wasn't heavy. It was spacious. I thought about all the moments that had led here. The Thanksgiving dinner where the lake house was announced like a gift I wasn't meant to receive. The email asking for my signature without my consent. The courtroom where facts finally mattered more than feelings. The checks, the hearings, the quiet phone calls that followed. None of it had been loud. None of it had looked like revenge from the outside. But everything had changed. In the weeks that followed, my mother called once. She didn't ask me to visit. She didn't mention my father's voicemail. She just said, "I hope you're happy." I considered that word. "Yes," I said, "I am." And I meant it. Paige never reached out again. I heard through indirect channels that she and Mark were considering moving, starting over somewhere new. I hoped they would. Distance can be clarifying when reflection isn't. As for my father, I heard nothing more. And that, too, was okay. Because here is the truth I wish someone had told me years ago. You don't win by being written back into a will. You don't reclaim your power by finally being chosen. You don't heal by waiting for the people who hurt you to understand why it mattered. You heal when you stop negotiating your worth. For a long time, I thought love meant flexibility, that being easy made me good, that silence kept the peace. What I know now is this: silence is not peace. Compliance is not love. And family does not get a lifetime pass to control you just because they were there first. The real turning point in my story wasn't the court order or the sale of the house. It was the moment I realized I was allowed to say no without offering an explanation that made someone else feel better. I didn't cut my family off in anger. I stepped back in clarity. And from that distance, I built a life that didn't require me to shrink, justify, or disappear. If you're listening to this and something feels uncomfortably familiar, if you've been labeled the difficult one for asking questions, the ungrateful one for wanting fairness, the cold one for setting boundaries, hear this clearly. You are not wrong for wanting consent instead of control. You are not cruel for choosing dignity over approval. And you are not obligated to keep sacrificing yourself to maintain an illusion. Sometimes the most powerful form of revenge isn't payback. It's living well without their permission. If this story resonated with you, if you've lived some version of it, leave a comment and tell me what boundary you're learning to set. And if you want more stories about family drama, betrayal, karma, and the moment the tables finally turn, take a second to like and subscribe. Thank you for listening. This is where my story ends, and where yours might begin.